You're watching Booze Hackers.
Hey, I'm Adrian Sanabria.
And I'm Mark Boltz Robinson, aka Sage Fedora.
And I'm Jeremy Finke. So today we're discussing summer cocktails. We're in the middle of July, so it seemed to be an appropriate topic to have right now. So, Adrian, what did you come up with?
Yeah, so I am not a huge cocktail guy. So I think in a lot of these episodes, I'm going to be the guy asking the dumb questions and throwing stuff out there. Big fan of beer, wine, and booze, but I usually like it neat. I don't often reach for the cocktails. So this is kind of fun for me. It's kind of new for me. One of the few cocktails that I do like are summer cocktails. I think the first cocktail I was really introduced to was the mojito. And I think that was actually at a DEF CON, like DEF CON 17 or something like that. People were ordering cocktails and I was like, yeah, why not? I've never really had a proper, mixed drink or cocktail or anything like that. And I'm a fan. I don't get into like the pomegranate acai, like I like the standard mojito, just mint and the less sweet. I'm still not of all the cocktails I've had, I don't, in mixed drinks, I don't get into super sweet stuff. So I picked three, and I did a little research on them. I found out the mojito is typically attributed to Cuba, which is cool. My father's Puerto Rican, so that's there's a lot of shared food and stuff between Puerto Rico and Cuba. And then the pina colada, which I don't think I've ever had a proper pina colada, and I haven't made one yet. But I'm probably going to here in the next week. That's attributed to Puerto Rico. And but then the one I'm most familiar with is the Caparina from Brazil. And super easy to make. Not a lot goes into it, which I like. But I still managed to screw it up the first couple of times I did it.
How did you screw it up?
Well, so I just kind of dumped everything together. I didn't do the what's the word? I bought it today. I didn't mudge it. Is it mudge?
The muddling to
muddle.
Yeah,
No, mudge is a person, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's part of the security hacker part, but yeah.
Mudge could muddle, but I don't think you can mudge a Caparina. So yeah, muddle. I didn't muddle it, so I had all the ice and alcohol and sugar in there, and the sugar wouldn't dissolve. Because once you got the alcohol in there and the ice in there, it just kind of swirled around the glass. First of all, I just had the normal granulated white sugar. I didn't have the superfine sugar that they tell you to use that dissolves more easily. And I didn't realize that it'll combine really easily with the lime juice. Like if you just do it in the right order, you do the right steps. It's kind of like making guacamole. Like you look at a recipe for it and you're like, oh yeah, it's simple. But it can be night and day just depending on how you put all those different ingredients together and what order you do it in. So yeah, the Caparina I think is probably one of my favorite summer drinks of those three.
Cool.
Nice.
So that's what you're drinking right now?
Nope, I didn't have time to make it. The aforementioned drama in the house prevented me from getting that ready in time. Even that simple a drink. I'll have one later tonight.
Awesome. Right
Right now, I'm just drinking my favorite rum. We'll have to put it in the show notes later. Unless the name of it comes to me, but it's a Venezuelan rum. Comes in like a leather sack. You probably know what I'm talking about. Pampero Anniversario, I think. That's what it's called.
I'm not a big rum drinker.
Never heard of it.
My favorite rum. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's Pampero Anniversario.
So it looks like a dark rum with the typical molasses-based ones.
So it's not a dark rum. It's made to be a sipping rum. It's aged quite a bit. It tastes like it's spiced, but I'm pretty sure it's all coming from the barrels that they put it in. They don't. It's not like Captain Morgan spiced or anything like that. It's not nasty sweet. But in my opinion, it's the best balanced of them out there because like I said, I don't like a lot of sweet, and a lot of rums get too sweet for me. Even nicer, more expensive sipping rums. But this one I think has the best balance for me, for my palate.
Cool.
So for me, I only have one, but this is called the Tree's Knees. So there's a typical cocktail called the Bee's Knees, which is normally gin with a little bit of lemon juice and honey. But of course, here in Vermont, we make everything with maple syrup. So maple trees, it's the Tree's Knees instead. This is basically, I made this with a boreal juniper gin from, I think I got it somewhere in Minnesota. The last time I was in Minneapolis, I think. One of the local, the craft distillery stuff that's going on these days. So I picked that up, and so I just used that to make this for the gin base. It does have a splash of lemon juice in it still too. About a tablespoon or so of actual pure Vermont maple syrup. And then I also had a local Green Mountain distillery maple liqueur. So I threw a splash of that in there too. And makes a very nice, refreshing, lemonade-y type boozy cocktail.
Awesome.
So I've got a few questions for you. Is that your creation? Did you come up with that?
The basis of it was actually when I got married about 5 years ago, we had a local catering company that did a lot of Vermont local across the board on the menu for friends and family. And it was basically the first time I heard of it was their creation or their variation of it. So I just modified it a little bit.
But the pun, the name and everything, was that you?
No, that I can't take
Tree's
credit
Knees?
for that.
Oh, okay. So I thought it would have made it a little bit darker with the maple syrup in there.
Yeah, it actually, being a sugar, I guess, a fair amount of it when I shook it to mix it. Some people think, oh my God, you shook it. But yes, because there's lemon juice in it as well, I shook it. And I think in that process, it somehow dissolved half the syrup. So it's
I've
there
been
to taste it. Unfortunately, the viewers can't taste it, but
no, but I'd be keen to try that. I think I might be allergic to juniper berries because I had a rogue juniper beer once. It's the only time I've had a beer that I had an allergic reaction to. My whole neck got red and very itchy and swelled up a bit. So I don't know if it was something else in the beer because I've never had gin. So believe it or not, talking about cocktails and I've never had gin.
Yeah, that could be. I've had adverse reactions to tequila for much the same reason. I think I might actually be those people that have an allergy to agave.
Oh, okay.
So that could be a thing.
But yeah, I was in Vermont once, and I was in Burlington, and went to the liquor store, and one of the few things that I bought to bring back with me was maple liqueur. And I was fascinated how I think I bought some beer and that maple liqueur, and I was fascinated how they had the two different registers. I got two receipts for it. Like the liquor is owned by the state, and anything I guess below a certain percentage of alcohol is Bob's Package Store or whatever the name of the actual place is.
Yep, it's a little quirk of Vermont law still that the Department of Liquor Control actually still controls liquor in a Prohibition era law of some kind. So all those transactions have to be run up separately with their registers and their terminals. So most of the places have one area for that, and then they've got the beer and the wine and stuff, cider and everything's in a different area, and that can be rung up as a regular grocery sale, so to speak.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Kansas has a very similar blue law setup where liquor stores are not allowed to sell non-liquor items. But of course, you want to buy your ice, your Coke, your mixers, and all the other stuff. And so they all have cages with a separate register, and they call it the party store. So I think though there's been so much pushback that even the law still stands, and they've all started ignoring it because of the overhead of running that. So we live essentially right on the state line between Kansas and Missouri has very low requirements for all their liquor stuff, and so I think all the Kansas stores were tired of losing business, et cetera. It's still illegal to sell on Sunday in Kansas, but everything in our area actually does sell in Kansas because people were just hopping, 5 miles over the state line, buying beer
Right.
or whatever, and coming back on Sunday. And so they're losing all those tax receipts, et cetera. And so I think all the cities basically rebelled against the state.
I can imagine just right behind the "Welcome to Missouri" sign, it's just liquor store, liquor store, liquor store.
In gas station.
Fireworks are like that here as you cross the county lines.
Yeah.
So
Awesome.
Jeremy, what are your cocktails?
Yeah, so I got 3, and I'll be honest, I did a lot of research. Google was my friend, and I ended up, after doing a lot of sampling and a lot of testing, I kind of narrowed down my choices by some parameters I decided to set up, kind of like you were talking about earlier, Adrian, as I wanted something easy to make, because when I think of summer cocktails, I think of, sitting around with friends. You want to be able to put these things together pretty well. You don't want to sit there and, put something together for 10 minutes and then it's gone in a minute. I'm a whiskey person, so I kind of stayed away from whiskey, trying to break out of that, because my imagination is we're going to have some kind of whiskey show at some point as well. And same with margaritas, stay away from margaritas, because we'll probably have something along there.
That'll be the Mexican special.
Yeah. So I ended up coming with 3 drinks, and as I kind of started thinking everything out, I was like, oh, they're red, white, and blue, and we're in the middle of July, and we just celebrated the 4th of July, and we celebrate, the women just won the World's Cup, and et cetera. So I was like, okay, so I'll be a little patriotic for this episode. So the first one I have is an Aperol Spritz, and so this is an Italian aperitif that is a little bit of some sparkling wine, probably Prosecco if you want to be very traditional, and then some Aperol, and then some soda water. So basically a 3-to-1 ratio. Threw it in with some ice. So you got that. And then I did do the mojito. And I did a bunch of flavored mojitos as well with fruit. So I had blueberry mojitos, blackberry mojitos. And again, as we talk about muddling and the effort that was required in that, and quite honestly, I'd rather just eat the fruit and drink the drink and not have to deal with the fruit inside the drink. They didn't really seem to offer much to that. So again, some rum, some sugar, mint, and then ginger beer on top of that. And then the last one I had is a alternative on a Moscow Mule. So it's essentially a Moscow Mule, but it's got blue curacao in it. And so it's got some vodka, 2 ounces of vodka, 1 ounce of blue curacao, 1 ounce of lime juice, and then again some ginger beer on top of that.
Carousel, how to turn anything into a Romulan ale.
Yes. And so they called this, the recipe I found called it a mermaid's mule because of the blue color. And so when I go through the 3 of them, this is nice. It's an aperitif. And I tried creating a couple other aperitifs, and, they tend to be a little bitter. But this one is nice enough. And I like it. I don't think you can sit around and drink this though, right? You're going to have 1 or 2 before dinner, and then you're going to move on. Also, it uses sparkling wine, and quite frankly, I'd rather just drink sparkling wine by itself. I'm much more comfortable with that. Again, the mojito, I like the mojitos, but you are having to muddle. I used these glasses for all 3 of them, so I actually had to muddle in a much more solid glass, dump those contents into this glass, and then finish off the drink. So I love ginger flavored stuff, Moscow Mules, Kentucky Mules, etc. So I think that this came out to be my favorite drink out of all of them.
It looks good too. Yeah, I
It's
just
like
have to say,
Kool-Aid for adults.
yeah. I love that you did red, white, and blue. That you got the colors into it. That's great.
Yeah,
Question on the
so
first
that
one.
was completely unplanned to have the coloring,
It
or
was, and then I was like, I've got to narrow some of these drinks down, and then I'm like, oh, I want to do the Aperol Spritz. And like I said, I tried a Negroni, tried to make a couple Negronis, which is apparently the second most popular cocktail in the country right now,
Hmm.
and it's just too bitter for me. Talked to a friend of mine who had one, or who really likes them. He's like, you're using the wrong gin, you're doing this wrong. Um, and so he's like, try a different gin, try to add some maple syrup to it. I'm like, okay, well, now it's kind of sweetening the thing up, but it still didn't really do it much for me. I much rather prefer this. But then I was trying to narrow it down, and I was like, oh, I'm going to have a red drink and a blue drink, and I bet I could pull off a white drink as well. And okay, we're in July, it'll all work out.
So you said you had to narrow it down. How many drinks did you have?
Oh, we won't get into that.
Many hours researching.
Yeah, I love to research and
Yeah.
experiment, right? I mean, that's what a lot of this is which is kind of funny. I think, why is actually a great topic for our first episode is you're kind of hacking ingredients together, right? When you're making a cocktail, you're taking a bunch of stuff and you're putting them together, and some of them complement each other and others of them, can make them turn bad, right? And so you're trying to take separate things, put them together, and make something greater than the sum of its parts.
A podcast is also a great way to give yourself permission to do a bunch of experimentation. Yep. It's for the podcast. I have to do it.
No, so it was fun. I like to bake and do stuff like that, and experiment, and so came up, did some I'm not sure I would have ever made this drink if I hadn't been doing research, etc. The mojitos I probably would have played around with a little bit, but again, this one, I just happened to stumble upon the recipe and like, oh, it's blue, it's kind of cool looking, it's different. Oh, it actually tastes pretty good. So
I usually end up picking, like, based on what I actually have on hand in the liquor cabinet or shelves, kind of look at, okay, so what can I make with these things?
Yeah.
Yeah, same. You get
Same.
lucky with Google, and sometimes you're just like, screw it, throw some stuff together, see what happens.
Right.
Yeah, same here. And that was part of the priciness of this experiment was I had to go buy a bunch of ingredients that I wouldn't normally keep on site, right? So
yeah, I think my staples are Saint Germain elderflower liqueur, because I like that sometimes as an option for instead of vermouth. I have the Carpano Antica, several just basic vermouths, a sweet one and a dry one. And at the moment, that's actually about all I have in terms of the sort of mixing things. And then everything else is a variation on either whiskey, gin, or maybe vodka sometimes. Kind of keep it simple.
Awesome.
Cool.
Someday we could hope to have like Jim McMurray's like massive whiskey
Yeah.
I just have one shelf of stuff, but it's stuff I like. So
yeah.
I do have quite a bit, but
I actually have some coffee liqueurs I need to figure out what to do with, because they, it's just I forget why I even bought them, but we have a few locally produced. I guess it's a big thing here. One is from Nashville, one's from Knoxville. Coffee liqueurs, and they taste pretty good. I mean, if you like the taste of black coffee, they're okay, but it's not something you just drink by itself. So I'm trying to figure out. So if you guys have any ideas on how I can get rid of my extra coffee liqueur, I'd be all ears. Or if anybody listening to this has any tips, I'd appreciate. I need to free up that space.
Yeah, I'm not a coffee drinker at all, so I wouldn't even know what to do with them. I don't like the flavor.
Yeah, I think I have a friend was moving and they couldn't take all the liquor with them, so we basically adopted a bunch of stuff, and I think there's like a Three Olives coffee infused vodka that I've never figured out what to do with yet. So other than
So you have something you need to get rid of too.
yeah, so we'll have to work on that together, I guess, and see what
there's a show idea. I'll sit back and watch.
There we go. Yeah, I think the first time I had alcohol in public, it was an accident. The high school band was invited to march the New Year's Day parade in London, and so 200 and some odd kids, high school kids, went to London, and we were just for a large part of it, we were just wandering around on our own. It was a different time. You wouldn't see that today, and we were eating in a pub once, and I liked coffee. I was a big fan of coffee back then. I think I was 16 at the time. And I ordered an Irish coffee. I was like, oh, that sounds good. And being in the UK, no questions asked, they brought me an Irish coffee, and of all things, I was eating lasagna, so Irish coffee here and lasagna, like two flavors you should never mix if you're ever tempted to. Take a swig of that Irish coffee, and it was a big surprise. But yeah, since then, I'm kind of a fan of mixing coffee and booze. I think it's a good combination. Can be.
Yeah.
If you like coffee.
Yeah, it's remarkable what you can mix whiskey with. Speaking of whiskey, that is our booze news segment for tonight's podcast, is the alarming amount of rickhouse failures that have been in the news lately. We have the one in the Barton 1792 distillery in Bardstown, Kentucky, collapsed. There was a partial collapse of the O.Z. Tyler distillery, rickhouse in Owensboro, Kentucky. And then, of course, the even bigger news was the massive Jim Beam fire. I think, Adrian, you had some interesting numbers to share about that you had crunched.
Yeah, and it's I'm really curious as to how common this is, because it seems like I don't recall ever seeing this in the news before. But yeah, the pictures were fascinating, and the numbers are too. That first warehouse, I think it was something like 18,000, the 1792, and it went down half at a time, which was really interesting to look at, because you got to see a perfect cross section of a rickhouse. And they use every square inch of that, don't they?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's very little space in there. It must be a science how they get the barrels in and out to even stack them in there. But yeah, that was 18,000. And then the second warehouse, I think you said it was partial. I don't know if it was the same case as the 1792, if the rest of it came down later, but that was supposedly 20,000 barrels. And then the fire was double that. It was 40,000 barrels. So a combined 78,000 barrels. I looked it up. Is roughly 1% of total annual bourbon production in Kentucky, or 4.6% of all the big brand name bourbon production, which all three of these were big brand names.
Wow.
Yeah, so I remember on the Jim Beam one, they didn't seem, at least from the press releases, nobody was terribly upset because it was mostly young whiskey, so it wasn't going to set back, a 7 or 8 aged bourbon or anything there, but it still has a lot of work that then needs to be restarted.
Yeah.
I was impressed with how they shrugged it off. The response from them was just kind of like, we got more.
It's 1%, 2%, whatever it was.
Yeah, I'm sure they're probably banking on the increasing whiskey prices as well to, they're going to bankroll it eventually anyway. So I was surprised. It was like, I saw there was a place online offering like the Yamazaki 12 for like $130 or something. And I had picked up a bottle in Tokyo about 4 or 5 years ago, and it was only like $30 there converted. So
I think there's been a run on on Japanese whiskey for whatever reason.
I think it just
I don't know
popular.
why.
Whiskey in general globally has just all of a sudden had a resurgence.
Yeah.
Of course, you would have had to have predicted it 12 years ago
Yep.
to really capitalize on it. So
Right, and I had read an article, or maybe I was watching another podcast or something, and they were talking about how the stock is actually now catching back up with demand, because as you mentioned, you've got to plan this stuff out 8 to 10 years in advance, and if you don't know you're going to sell that product, you're not going to make it. So
right.
And I don't know about you guys, but there's some stuff I'm noticing that's hard to get here now. Lagavulin, which is one of my favorite scotches, the Lagavulin 16 and the Distiller's Edition, is usually an empty slot on the shelf at most of my liquor stores. And the Buffalo Trace, of all things, goes missing off the shelves. And Eagle Rare has finally caught up with its namesake. And when it shows up on shelves in Tennessee, word gets around and it disappears within hours.
Yeah,
it's like that.
That is actually even here, which you would think would have a little less demand, I suppose, just by population. But for some reason, Eagle Rare now, like people are starting to realize that, especially for the price point, it's a really good daily sipper worth having around. And so it's very difficult to come by. Unfortunately, we've got here, like when we do an episode on whiskey, I'll have to show some of the local stuff, because Vermont's got quite a bit of local craft distilleries that are producing aged whiskeys at this point. So,
well, those are, I think it's just kind of following the craft brewery thing. We've got distilleries popping up like crazy here too. And yeah, that's, of course they can't age stuff super fast, so all their initial products are either some kind of neutral spirit like gins and stuff like that. We actually have a local one here, local distillery that just sells just corn whiskey, like
that's kind of new hotness right now,
white whiskey, and people are buying it and putting it in tiny barrels and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Actually, there's one here that does that. There's a Appalachian Gap just over in Middlebury, Vermont, and they have it's aged about 2 years, called Ridgeline, but then they have its counterpart, the unaged version that you can buy as soon as they make it, called Snowfall. It's completely clear. And I was actually thinking, because people buy those little barrels and then they put it in like their home man cave or whatever, which is a climate controlled environment. And I'm like, well, you're not really, you can age it and it'll work to some extent, but it seems like you would get more benefit if you put it outside or something where you have greater temperature fluctuation to get the wood to do the expanding and contracting and massage the whiskey. So I had a thought about, actually, I was going to buy a few bottles of that and a couple of those little casks and fill each of them with a bottle, hopefully from the same batch even, and then put them in, like, one out in the barn, one in the garage, one in the basement, and kind of see, like, aging them all for the same amount of time and get an idea, like, what kind of difference it actually makes.
That's a really cool experiment. I'd be really interested in the results of that. That would be great to reveal the results on this podcast.
Yeah. So we'll have to figure that out at some point.
So what's the time frame on that? How long would you need to do it before you'd be ready to drink them? Or would you just check every now and then?
I'd probably
play
spot checks every now and then. I think those barrels are intended to age things for like 3 months, maybe to 6. So I would probably do like every 6 months. I'm not sure how long a bottle would last too, because of course you do actually have that angel's share lost to evaporation as well. So
right.
Yeah, the smaller bottles generally age quicker by a bit because there's more surface area with the liquor touching the wood. So
yeah. So well, cool. So I think that's it for our first episode.
Yep.
Thanks everybody for watching. We really appreciate having you along and hope you enjoy the next episodes to come.